Las Vegas, 1977. The world knew Elvis as the king, and Marvin as the Prince of Soul. But what happened when these two legends met in secret changed everything. In a dimly lit hotel suite, away from cameras and crowds, Elvis Presley and Marvin Gaye sat face to face for what would become music history's most incredible conversation. The only witness to this meeting has finally broken his silence after 45 years, and what these icons discussed will leave you speechless. If stories like this fascinate you as much as they do us, please consider subscribing to our channel for more untold stories from music history's most legendary figures. August 16, 1977. Elvis Presley was performing his final Vegas residency at the International Hotel, though nobody knew it would truly be his last. The king was battling demons that few could understand: prescription drug dependency, crushing loneliness despite constant crowds, and the weight of being an icon when all he wanted was to be human. 3 floors above Elvis's penthouse suite, Marvin Gaye was hiding from his own troubles. The Prince of Soul had fled to Vegas to escape mounting debts, a bitter divorce from Anna Gordy, and his own dangerous dance with cocaine that was threatening to destroy everything he'd built. What brought these two tortured souls together wasn't coincidence, it was desperation. But the man who made it happen has kept this secret buried for nearly half a century, until now. Johnny Martinez was the night manager at the International Hotel, a 28-year-old kid from East LA who'd worked his way up from bellhop to one of the most trusted positions in Vegas hospitality. Martinez had seen everything in his years at the hotel: mob meetings, celebrity breakdowns, political scandals, but he'd never seen anything quite like what happened that August night. It started with a phone call at 2:30 in the morning. Martinez was doing his final rounds when the red phone at the front desk rang, the direct line reserved only for the penthouse suites. On the other end was a voice he recognized immediately, though it sounded different than usual. Broken, desperate. "Johnny, it's Elvis. I need you to do something for me, and I need you to keep it between us." The king's voice was shaking, and Martinez could hear something in the background. Was Elvis crying? What Elvis requested seemed impossible at first. He wanted to meet with Marvin Gaye, who had been staying incognito on the 15th floor for 3 weeks. But this wasn't just any meeting. Elvis wanted complete secrecy. No bodyguards, no Colonel Parker, no entourage, just 2 men talking. Martinez knew both superstars were struggling, but he had no idea how deep their pain ran or how desperately they needed each other in that moment. The logistics alone seemed overwhelming. How do you secretly move the most famous man in America 3 floors down without anyone noticing? But Martinez had seen the look in Elvis's eyes earlier that evening during his show. Something was different. The king had stumbled twice during Can't Help Falling in Love, and between songs he'd stared out at the audience with an expression Martinez had never seen before: pure, unadulterated fear. Later, Martinez would realize that Elvis somehow knew his time was running out, and he needed to have one honest conversation with someone who might understand what it felt like to be trapped inside their own legend. Martinez didn't ask questions. In his 5 years at the International Hotel, he'd learned that sometimes the most important thing you could do for a guest was simply say yes. Within 30 minutes, he'd arranged everything. He used the service elevator that connected directly to the penthouse level, coordinated with housekeeping to ensure the hallways were clear, and even had the hotel's head of security take an extended coffee break. At 3:15 a.m., Martinez knocked on Marvin Gaye's door with a message that would change both men's lives forever. Marvin opened the door wearing dark sunglasses despite the hour, his usually immaculate afro disheveled, a glass of something stronger than water in his hand. When Martinez delivered Elvis's invitation, Marvin's first reaction was laughter, bitter, hollow laughter that echoed off the hotel corridor walls. "The king wants to see the prince," Marvin said, his Detroit accent thick with exhaustion and something else Martinez couldn't quite identify. What could Elvis Presley possibly want with Marvin Gaye at 3 in the morning? But something in Martinez's expression must have conveyed the urgency of the moment, because Marvin's demeanor shifted completely. He set down his glass, straightened his shoulders, and nodded slowly. "Give me 5 minutes." When he emerged from his room, Marvin had transformed back into the sophisticated performer the world knew, but Martinez could see the curiosity burning in his eyes behind those dark glasses. Neither man had any idea they were about to embark on the most important conversation of their careers. The service elevator ride from the 15th to the 18th floor took exactly 97 seconds, but Martinez would later say it felt like hours. Marvin stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the numbers as they climbed. The only sound was the mechanical whirring of the elevator and Marvin's soft humming. a melody Martinez didn't recognize, but that seemed to calm the soul singer's nerves. When they reached the 18th floor, Marvin turned to Martinez and said something that still gives the former hotel manager chills. "Whatever happens in that room tonight, Johnny, promise me you'll never tell anyone until we're both gone." Martinez promised, and he kept that promise for 45 years. Through Elvis's death just hours later, through Marvin's tragic end in 1984, through decades of speculation and rumors about whether these two icons ever met, Martinez carried this secret alone. Only now, at 73 years old and battling his own mortality, has he decided the world deserves to know what really happened when two of music's greatest voices came together in their darkest hour. Elvis opened the penthouse door himself, something Martinez had never seen before. Usually the king was surrounded by an army of bodyguards, assistants, and hangers-on. But tonight Elvis Presley stood alone in the doorway wearing a simple black tracksuit, his famous hair uncombed, his eyes red-rimmed but alert. When he saw Marvin, something extraordinary happened. Both men seemed to shed their famous personas instantly. The king and the prince vanished, replaced by two exhausted, frightened, desperately lonely human beings who recognized something in each other that the rest of the world couldn't see. "Marvin," Elvis said, his voice barely above a whisper, "thank you for coming. I know this is strange, but He paused, struggling with words that had never failed him on stage. Marvin stepped forward and placed a hand on Elvis's shoulder, a gesture so natural and compassionate that Martinez felt like he was intruding on something sacred. "Brother," Marvin said, and that single word seemed to unlock something in both men. "We don't need explanations, we just need truth." Martinez positioned himself in the hallway outside the suite, close enough to ensure their privacy but far enough to give them space. What he heard through that door over the next 2 hours would haunt and inspire him for the rest of his life. Two voices, one from Memphis, one from Detroit, sharing stories, fears, regrets, and dreams that they'd never told another living soul. The first thing Martinez heard was silence. Not uncomfortable silence, but the kind of peaceful quiet that comes when two people finally feel safe enough to drop their masks. Then Elvis began talking, his voice so different from the commanding presence Martinez knew from countless performances. The king spoke about the prison of fame, about how success had become a golden cage that was slowly suffocating him. He talked about the pills that helped him sleep and the pills that helped him wake up, and how somewhere along the way he'd lost track of which Elvis was real and which was just performance. Marvin listened without judgment, occasionally humming in agreement or offering soft words of understanding. Then it was his turn. The Prince of Soul opened up about his own struggles with substances, about the pressure of being Berry Gordy's golden boy at Motown, about how the civil rights movement had burdened him with expectations he wasn't sure he could fulfill. He spoke about his failing marriage to Anna Gordy, about the debt that was drowning him, about nights when he'd stand on hotel balconies and wonder if the world might be better off without Marvin Gaye. But what happened next was something Martinez never expected. Instead of wallowing in their shared misery, these two broken superstars began to heal each other. Elvis started talking about Marvin's music, how What's Going On had given him hope during some of his darkest moments, how Marvin's voice had a spiritual quality that reminded Elvis why he'd fallen in love with music in the first place. Marvin in turn spoke about watching Elvis's early performances and seeing a young man who wasn't afraid to move his body, to be sexual, to be dangerous in a way that had opened doors for every black performer who came after. 2 hours into their conversation, something shifted. Martinez heard movement, then the sound of Elvis's piano. The king had moved to the baby grand in the corner of his suite and was playing something soft and melancholy. Then Marvin's voice joined in, not singing words but creating vocal melodies that wrapped around Elvis's piano like silk. For 20 minutes, these two legends created music together that no one else would ever hear, raw, spontaneous, and more honest than anything either had ever recorded. When the impromptu session ended, Martinez heard Elvis say something that would echo through both their remaining years. "Marvin, I think we're both dying, not from pills or pressure or fame, but from forgetting why we started making music in the first place. We started because music saved us, and somehow we let the business kill the very thing that gave us life." Marvin's response was immediate and powerful. "Then let's save each other, brother. Let's remember how to be musicians instead of just superstars." What followed was a pact between two men who understood that they were running out of time. Elvis promised Marvin he would try to reconnect with the gospel roots that had first inspired him to sing. Marvin promised Elvis he would stop running from his demons and face them head-on, starting with his relationship with his father and his dependence on drugs. They exchanged phone numbers, made plans to collaborate on music that would strip away all the commercial expectations and focus purely on the spiritual power of their voices. As dawn broke over Las Vegas, Martinez watched two transformed men say goodbye. The exhausted, broken souls who had entered that room 6 hours earlier were gone, replaced by artists who had rediscovered their purpose. Elvis hugged Marvin, a long brotherly embrace that spoke of genuine affection and mutual respect. "I'll call you next week," Elvis said. "We're going to make music that matters again." Marvin nodded, his eyes bright with possibility for the first time in months. "The world needs to hear what we found tonight, brother. The world needs to know that even legends can find their way home." Martinez escorted Marvin back to his floor, and both men were unusually quiet during the elevator ride. When they reached the 15th floor, Marvin turned to Martinez one final time. "That man up there just saved my life," he said. "I hope I did the same for him." Then Marvin Gaye walked into his room, and Martinez never saw him again. The Prince of Soul checked out later that morning and returned to Los Angeles with a new determination to rebuild his life and career. But the promise Elvis and Marvin made to each other would never be fulfilled. 16 hours after their transformative conversation, Elvis Presley was found dead in his Graceland bathroom. The king had returned to Memphis that morning carrying the hope and inspiration he'd found in Marvin's friendship. But his body was too damaged by years of abuse to support his renewed spirit. The last person Elvis called was his father, Vernon Presley, and according to Vernon's later testimony, Elvis's final words were about a conversation he'd had with a friend that had given him reason to believe he could still make music that mattered. Marvin Gaye learned of Elvis's death while recording at a studio in Los Angeles. Witnesses say he collapsed to his knees and wept openly, not just for the loss of a fellow artist, but for the loss of what might have been the most important musical collaboration in history. The album Marvin was working on at the time was scrapped completely. Instead, he channeled his grief and the inspiration he'd drawn from Elvis into what would become Here, My Dear, one of the most brutally honest albums ever recorded. Martinez kept his promise for 45 years, watching from afar as speculation swirled about whether Elvis and Marvin had ever met. He saw documentaries that missed the truth, biographies that never mentioned their connection, and countless articles about both men's final years that failed to capture the brief moment when they'd found hope in each other. When Marvin was killed by his father in 1984, Martinez attended the funeral, standing in the back and remembering the man who'd walked into an elevator 7 years earlier looking for salvation. Only now, as Martinez faces his own mortality, has he decided to break his silence. "The world deserves to know," he says, his voice still strong despite his 73 years. "Not because it's scandalous or shocking, but because it's beautiful." For 6 hours, two of the greatest artists who ever lived found their way back to the music that had saved them as children. They remembered why they started singing in the first place, and they gave each other permission to be human again. The conversation between Elvis Presley and Marvin Gaye lasted exactly 6 hours and 23 minutes. No recording exists, no photographs were taken, and until now, only Johnny Martinez knew it had happened at all. But the impact of that night rippled through both men's remaining work in ways that only become clear when you know what to look for. Elvis's final performances in the weeks before his death show a renewed spiritual depth, a return to the gospel influences that had shaped his earliest recordings. Marvin's subsequent albums display a vulnerability and honesty that hadn't been present in his work since What's Going On. Today, Martinez lives quietly in a retirement home in Henderson, Nevada, just outside Las Vegas. His room is decorated with photographs from his decades in hospitality, but the picture that holds the place of honor on his nightstand shows the International Hotel as it looked in 1977. Sometimes, late at night, Martinez says he can still hear echoes of that impromptu musical collaboration. Elvis's piano and Marvin's voice creating something beautiful and unrepeatable in the darkness before dawn. The secret meeting between the King of Rock and Roll and the Prince of Soul lasted just one night, but its legacy continues to inspire anyone who believes in music's power to heal broken spirits. In a world where celebrity often masks profound loneliness, their story reminds us that even legends need friendship, understanding, and the occasional reminder of why they fell in love with music in the first place. Sometimes the most important conversations happen in hotel rooms at 3 in the morning, between two souls who recognize each other's pain and choose to offer hope instead of judgment. The music Elvis Presley and Marvin Gaye might have made together remains one of history's great what-ifs, but the human connection they shared that night in Las Vegas proves that some collaborations transcend any recording studio. They found their way back to the truth of who they were beneath the spotlights and screaming crowds, and in doing so, they gave each other the greatest gift one artist can offer another: permission to be real.